Welcome back, anatomy students. So today at Hazlitt High, we had a power outage, so no school. And we were supposed to review today for our test that is tomorrow. And a common question is, will we still have the test? And I think we should be able to. We've had our review sheet forever. We've been done learning new information since, I think, Tuesday last week. So we haven't added anything new. You've had a whole week to really review on your own. So I think we should be able to go forward and take this test. So I'm going to conduct my in-class review online today, and hopefully that'll help you feel a little bit more prepared for tomorrow's test. So in the Google Classroom, you can go all the way back to November 7th. That was the first day that we started posting things related to the nervous system. We've posted lots of videos, whether they were videos I made or they were short clips that I thought were helpful for a specific topic. So if it were me, I'd go back through November 7th. I would pull up the PowerPoints we've done, or if you'd rather watch the videos, do the videos. I would look at the objective questions you guys have had in the past. A lot of those are multiple choice questions, and a good amount of your test is multiple choice. So where do you think I get my questions? So that would be a good place to look for those. We've had a couple quizzes. Anything you got wrong on that quiz the first or second time, you want to correct that information so that you don't get it wrong come tomorrow on the test. So here's what the test looks like. You have 4 true false. That's an odd number. It would be nice to have 5. Don't think I'll be getting on the computers at school today, so it's going to stay as 4. We have 3 different sets of matching. So one set has to do with the outer brain, so the cerebrum, right? And we talked about lobes of the cerebrum. We named a couple specific features. The second one has to do with the inner brain, which is what you can see in this graphic here. And the third one has to do with neurons and neuralgia. So for that, I would go back and look at those 2 quizzes you took. One of those quizzes had to do with neurons and neuralgia. So if you think you could make a matching out of that, identify the neuron neuralgia and identify its function or characteristic description. 23 questions are multiple choice. There is a labeling of the sagittal section of the brain, so that would be this. You want to be sure that you're orientated in the proper direction. And the last set of objectives we did, many people had their brain backwards according to the labeling. So notice the bumps on the brainstem face forward. That might be something you can look at. You should recognize the cerebellum is the back side. So orientate yourself in the proper direction. Your corpus callosum, I don't know how you want to say. If you want to say that it faces forward, but it comes together with the fornix in the back, maybe that. So it moves forward. The pituitary gland, that would be forward as well. You have 5 word eliminations, so I like to look at my vocab sheet for that. Remember, I've chunked your vocab terms, so 4 out of the 5 words are going to be types of neuralgia, and so you want to pick the one that's not in that chunk. 4 out of the 5 terms are types of neurons or divisions of the nervous system, so you should recognize one that doesn't belong. And then there are 2 free response questions. One is going to be more of an AP quality, and that would be this one down here with the neurons, the pathway or the reflex arc. So remember, you have sensory receptors sending signals to the brain. The brain is interpreting information and then sending signals out through the motor pathways. So you want to be able to discuss that. The other one has to do with the sympathetic nervous system and effects of. So given a situation, what would the effects of the sympathetic nervous system be? So I would look at some graphics related to the sympathetic nervous system to remind myself what it's doing. Sympathetic nervous system is preparing me for fight or flight, right? So it's going to be all those things that deliver more oxygen and more blood and allow me to take in more information. So my pupils are going to dilate, my heartbeat's going to speed up, my blood pressure is going to go up, my blood vessels in my abdominal area is going to constrict. I don't need blood going to my stomach. I need it going out to my arms and my legs. So the vessels are going to dilate in the arms and legs. And you can look through this list as well as just pull up any graphic of sympathetic nervous system and you will see the kind of things that it does. So from here on, this should correspond with your review sheet. So I'm just going to go step by step through the reviews. This question here, identify 3 functions of the nervous system. That gets you ready for a number of multiple choice questions, as well as this would be part of that AP free response question. So the 3 jobs of the nervous system we just identified as sensory input, integration, and motor output. But what really does that mean? So first of all, we're monitoring changes both internally and externally, and we have lots of receptors that allow us to do that. So we talked about photoreceptors in the eye. We've talked about proprioceptors that are in our tendons. You have chemoreceptors in your mouth and in your nose, and mechanoreceptors in your ears. So we have lots of ways of monitoring changes outside of us or inside of us. We have chemoreceptors, baroreceptors for pressures. That monitor like how much oxygen is in our blood. So all of those things are going to monitor our environment, and we're going to recognize changes that occur. Then our brain, our central nervous system, is important for processing and interpreting information. So that's the integration phase. So we're going to take in that information. We might be recognizing whether we enjoy it or don't enjoy it, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We might recognize that it's something that needs a response. We might recognize that it might be taking in information and learning from it so that we can respond to it later. And then finally, we need to create some sort of response. So it might be sensory related, in which case I see something and I do something. I'm not really sure what this integration might be. Maybe I decide I see a bear and I'm going to run away. It might be changing our blood pressure. It might be changing our heart rate, our breathing rate. It might be that we're physically going to do something. Maybe we're going to shoot a basket. Any of those kind of things can be a response. So the next question has to do with the myelin sheath. Remember, this can be made out of Schwann cells if it's in the PNS, or oligodendrocytes if it's in the CNS. So the main job of the myelin is simply to insulate and protect axonal fibers, so axons. Remember, if there's damage to this, we're not going to repair it too quickly. In the central nervous system, we may not repair it at all. In your peripheral nervous system, you're going to repair axons about a quarter inch a year. So there will be a little bit of regrowth, but you can't regenerate an entire cell. So first we need like a fatty protective coat, and then also it's going to help speed up neurotransmission, and we have a slide on that later talking about saltatory conduction. So that's made possible because of the myelin. Neurons can be classified either functionally according to the impulse direction, or they can be classified structurally according to the number of extensions. So first of all, the 3 functional classifications are afferent, efferent, and interneuron, or associative. So afferent information, that is your sensory info. That's going up toward the brain. Efferent, that's your motor info. It's coming down away from the brain. And the interneuron, or the associative neuron, is found within the central nervous system entirely. And we saw on a quiz that it connects to neurons. So we divide the nervous system into the central and the peripheral, and then we further divide the peripheral into somatic and autonomic, and then autonomic will divide again. But what is the difference between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system? So first of all, somatic is just referring to those voluntary things. So we can control our skeletal muscles. So that is our somatic nervous system. Autonomic is the things that we cannot control. So you see the word automatic. You almost see that when you read that word. So the autonomic regulates involuntary things like your cardiac, your smooth muscle, and your glands. So glands will have to release hormones. Your heart rate speeds up, slows down. Smooth muscles like your vessels, we know can constrict or dilate. Same thing in our pupils. So that's the difference, really, whether you can control it or not control it. If at any time you can control it, it is a somatic nerve that services that muscle. If at any time you cannot control it, or I should say if most of the time you cannot control it, I'm going to call that autonomic. If you want a review of the different divisions of the nervous system, you can click that link. It's Khan Academy. and it's 3 minutes and 47 seconds. So you can look at that later. Afferent and efferent are both functional classifications of the nervous system, of pathways, of neurons themselves. So afferent means that it's going toward the central nervous system, the information, the impulses, the nerve. And the efferent means that it's going away from the central nervous system. So it's taking information out in order to cause response, whereas afferent is taking information in order to be interpreted. Okay, describe the physical or physiological effects of the sympathetic nervous system. So this is going to help prepare you for that short free response question. So physiological, remember, is functioning, not behavioral. Sometimes kids will give me answers like run away or you get scared. Those are more behavioral than they are physiological. Okay, so what is it doing to your body that causes responses? So you can look at this brown line here. It's going to dilate your pupils so you can take in more information so you can make the best decisions. We're not going to be digesting food, so you can inhibit or stop producing any enzymes that are related to digestion. So in your mouth, the saliva usually contains enzymes. We don't need that. It's going to dilate your bronchioles, so those are airways. So we want big airways so we can take in as much oxygen as possible. It's going to cause your heart to speed up. Again, we want to deliver as much blood and oxygen to our legs and arms as possible. So we're going to go faster. We're going to release norepinephrine. So epinephrine and norepinephrine are going to be involved in causing some of these reactions. We're going to inhibit our stomach from digesting food. So we're going to constrict the blood vessels and blood's going to go away from the stomach area. Those are the butterflies in your stomach that you feel. We're hopefully going to inhibit urination. Again, those are muscles that you don't need in order to save your life. What you want to do is either fight for your life or you want to get out. So those are some of the things that you could identify. We also talked about prickly scalp, sweaty palms, so those would be involved as well. We could generalize and say that all the opposite things will be true of the physiological effects of the parasympathetic nervous system. So parasympathetic nervous system has to do with resting and digesting. So now I'm going to let all my vitals go back to normal. It's not like I'm going to necessarily go to sleep. So we're conserving energy for times when we need it more. We're going to allow ourselves to digest, so probably going to deliver some blood back into the stomach and start releasing some enzymes. So everything else is just going back to normal. So our eyes were dilated, now they're going to constrict to the normal size. We're going to stimulate glands. Glands are going to release digestive enzymes that are going to be needed. We don't need the big airways. It's really going to take a lot of energy to prep us for sympathetic responses. So our airways is going to go back down. We don't need as much energy, so we don't need as much oxygen. Same thing, constricting your bronchioles. We're going to stimulate digestion in the stomach and elimination in the bladder and intestines. Good stuff. So sympathetic gets you ready to fight, and parasympathetic takes you back down. In the past on this test, I've had students draw and label a neuron, but I learned from your quiz that you guys all pretty well get that, so I don't feel the need to test you again on it. So you won't see a diagram, you won't have to label it, though there might be some questions related to individual parts, like the axon is taking information away from the cell body. The synaptic terminals, that's where we're going to release neurotransmitters. The cell body, that's where the nucleus is, and therefore that's the metabolic portion of our cell. These tree-like branches, these are our dendrites, and we know for sensory cells, the dendrites are called receptors. So they're specialized to receive information, and they're depolarizing according to whatever stimulus they respond to. So like photoreceptors are going to depolarize when they absorb certain wavelengths of light. So though you won't have to diagram it, you just want to recognize the job of each part. So the part that carries impulses toward the cell body, notice the arrow here, those are the dendrites, takes it away from the cell body, again follow the arrows, that's the axon. Okay, it looks like this is a repeat. We already talked about axons take information away from the cell body. A reflex arc, remember that's going to be a sensory neuron, associative, and a motor neuron. What part of the reflex arc detects the stimulus? That would be here at the dendrites. So the sensory receptor is going to be the one receiving the initial signal, and then after that it'll be the dendrites of the following cells that are going to receive that depolarizing neurotransmitter that allows the impulse to continue traveling. All right, for this I would go back and I would look at that quiz on neurons and neuralgia. This looks like it would make for a good matching. So the microglia, micro, small. So these are the smallest of your neuralgia. Here you see the little guy. Their job is to clean up debris, and we use the word phagocytic or phagocyte because it engulfs and then digests whatever particles it's picking up. Astrocytes, astrostar, so these are the largest of all of the cells. Here you see it anchoring the neuron to the blood supply, to the capillaries. So anything blood related, nutrients, the word blood, the word capillary, blood-brain barrier, any of those words you want to associate with the astrocytes. Ependymal cells I don't see in this picture, but they line the brain and the spinal cord, and they have cilia on them, so the cilia moves to help circulate the cerebrospinal fluid. Schwann cells are only found in the PNS. Right here, they look like little wrappings that are found on the axon of the nerve cell. So their job is to insulate and protect and speed the neural transmission. Satellite cells are only found in the PNS, so again, it's not in this picture. And they're going to be wrapped around the cell body. So they act similar to Schwann cells, but supporting the whole cell body, protecting it. And then oligodendrocytes, so this is an oligodendrocyte. It makes the myelin sheath within the central nervous system. So it acts a little bit differently than the Schwann cell that wraps its whole body around. It's only wrapping extensions, and that's how it works. So the neuralgia that are found in the peripheral nervous system, PNS, are the Schwann and satellite cells. So you can use the mnemonic device that they both start with an S. So here's our Schwann cells on the axon, here's our satellite cell on the cell body. Comparing saltatory and constant conduction, remember saltatory is jumping. So impulses are jumping from one node to the next, and that impulse, remember, is a depolarization. So if there's a wrapping on the axon, there's not going to be any room for sodium to move in and out or potassium to move in and out, and we need those ions to be moving in order for there to be an impulse, in order for there to be an action potential, in order for there to be a depolarization. So one of the big differences is saltatory conduction is much more quick because it can jump from node to node to node, and constant conduction is constant, right? So every single nanometer along the way has to have that open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close channels of sodium and potassium. So here you can click a little video that takes you, and it will be less than a minute long. I like this graphic here because you can see the depolarization going constant. And then this one you can see it jumping and how much more quickly it gets to the bottom of the axon when it can jump. So neurotransmitters are released at synapses. So these are on the same slide. Here we have neurotransmitters. They're chemical messengers that send some sort of signal. They cause a depolarization on the next cell. So it's released from one neuron, and it can only be released by a neuron. And then it's received by another neuron or a muscle or a gland. So this could be a sensory neuron sending signals to associative. It could be associative sending it to motor. It could be motor sending it to your bicep muscle. So crossing the synapse is one of a number of different neurotransmitters. They all have a specific shape. And so that next cell would have receptors that fit that particular chemical shape. And then the different neurotransmitters will cause responses on different types of cells. A reflex is the simplest response to a stimuli. It usually involves 2 to 3 cells. So at the minimum, you have 2 cells. Remember, sometimes the spinal connection isn't made. We don't need an associative nerve. Like for the knee-jerk reaction, there's not a right or wrong response, so there's no integration needed. Here, we're going to integrate because there is a right or wrong response. Do I leave my hand over the open flame or do I pull it away? So this one will probably involve 3, where this this one does involve 3, but it could possibly involve 2 depending on what it is. So it's predetermined, it's already a set pattern, it's a learned response. Because it's a learned pathway, I should say. And so your body already knows what to do. A lot of information is on this slide. So parts of the brain and what they do. Remember, there's going to be a matching that involves that. So can you match these structures with their specific job? There'll also be some multiple choice questions that relate the structure to its location or relate the structure to its job as well. So the cerebrum, largest portion of the brain, about 85% of the brain is the cerebrum. So you might see it called the cerebrum, the cortex, the cerebral cortex. We know it's made up of lobes, so anything that's true of the lobes is also true of the cerebrum. So pretty much this is your thinking portion of your brain. This is your consciousness. We'll talk about the lobes separately, but like I said, all of the jobs the lobes do, the cerebrum does. So this is my thinking, my talking, my doing, my movements, all of that. The cerebellum is a coordination of movements, so 2 things moving at the same time in sync with one another. It's located below the occipital lobe. It also controls your balance and equilibrium. And we'll talk about that in the next chapter. Hypothalamus, found below the thalamus. Lots of kids label this one wrong. So please, please, please review thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus so you can get them right on the test. So the hypothalamus is controlling your hunger, your thirst, your fatigue, your anger. So I think of it as my drives, my wants. That's coming from my hypothalamus. So it makes up part of the diencephalon, and then we know it's associated with the anterior. It's associated with the whole pituitary gland, I should say. The medulla, that's medulla oblongata, is part of the brainstem. It is the distalmost portion, so the one closest to the spinal cord. I use distal as in it's furthest the attachment of the brain. That's what I mean by distal. So the medulla is the bottom portion of the brainstem. It controls your vital signs, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing rate, the depth, all of those things. Also vomiting and swallowing. The midbrain, again, part of the brainstem. It's closest the brain. So it is involved with reflexes related to hearing and vision. So it's kind of hard to relate to that one. The pons is really just a pathway of nerves. So a bunch of neurons go together to make a nerve, and a bunch of nerves go together to make a track. So these are tracks related to breathing. And then the thalamus, again, part of the diencephalon. We're going to see that in a minute. It is really a relay station for sensory input. So it kind of puts an emotion or a feeling on your sensory, and it decides if it's good or it's bad, and it sends it to different parts of the sensory cortex for interpretation. So here we have a picture of the brain, right? So this is the outer brain, this is the inner brain. This is the type of picture you'll see that you have to label. This is helpful because it allows you to just be able to describe things. So it's located inferior and posterior. So it's in the back, and it's below, and it's the occipital lobe. Or it's found inferior to the occipital lobe. That'd be the cerebellum. So these are reference points, right? We talk about the pre in front of and the post in back of. The precentral gyrus, which is our motor cortex, and our post-central gyrus, and that would be our sensory cortex. In front of our sensory or our motor cortex, we also have our premotor cortex, so in front of that. And then the frontal lobe, this is more of your thinking, your higher level mental math and critical thinking and things like that. Speech, that's the Broca's area right here that we talk about. So you can see that's mostly frontal lobe. Temporal lobe here, we can see it's related to memory processing, but I'm going to just really associate it with hearing and the sense of smell, which I don't really see on this picture. And then occipital lobe, we're associating with vision. You can see that right there. And then back here, more things related to sensory information. Tactile is like your touch. So I think this is helpful in order to like take a picture and then talk about the picture. That's a good way to study anatomy. Not just like be able to label things, but when you look at this picture, talk about each of those words. So I have a little mix here. These are outer brain and this is inner brain. But remember, you're going to have an outer brain matching and an inner brain matching. So you would expect to see all these lobes on the same matching set. So the frontal lobe, we just talked about it. I like this graphic because it talks about each of these pieces that are on this except for the corpus callosum. So the frontal lobe in the pink, and you can see it's in charge of thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving. Also your emotions and behavioral control. So that's, notice the word control. So that you have an emotion that makes you want to do something, like I want to throw your cell phone against the wall, but my frontal lobe tells me I can't do it. So it controls those emotions. Our motor cortex, we already talked about. Motor has to do with movement. So your physicality, sensory, our postcentral gyrus here. So that's the sensations. I can feel touch. I can feel a tickle or something like that. Parietal lobe, making sense of the world. Occipital lobe is your vision. We already talked about that. Temporal. Again, I'm associating this with sense of smell and hearing. Yes, memory, and yes, language, but I try not to get that confused with other parts of the brain that also do those things. So I try to only associate one place for that job. And so temporal, hearing, and smelling. Broca's area is what I'm associating with speech, and that is found in the frontal lobe. Corpus callosum, that we don't see. You got to have a sagittal section of the brain to see that. We learned that that's like 50 million nerves all tied together that connect the two sides of the brain and let the right talk to the left and the left talk to the right. We saw that in a video. So that is that's the outer part of the brain. The brain has three main features that help protect it, and that would be the skull, the cerebrospinal fluid, and the meninges. So here is a little section of the brain and its protection. So this porous portion, that's your flat bone that makes up your skull. And then we have the dura mater, which is the blue, and the arachnoid, which is the fibrous looking one. And then real tight to the surface of the brain is your pia mater. So that's that. And then you have cerebrospinal fluid. In the blue here, see the arrows? The blue circulating the whole brain. We can see it goes from the brain down and around the spinal cord. We see it going inside of the inner brain and around the cerebellum. So it's going in the different ventricles of the brain. That would be the cerebrospinal fluid. So the three parts of that protect the brain. You have the skull. That's probably the most physical part, right? And then you have my cat is getting into my camera. You have the cerebrospinal fluid, which is a shock absorber for the most part. And then you have the three meninges, and that's the next question. So the dura mater, which means tough mother, and the arachnoid, which is spider-like, so you can see those fibers, and then pia, which is delicate. Those are your three meninges. Use your prefixes and suffixes, right? So epi is above or upon. So where is the epidural space? Because you get an epidural, like an injection sometimes in surgeries or procedures, you might have an epidural. So where does that go? Epi is above or upon, so that's going to be above the dura mater, right? Subarachnoid. Where's the subarachnoid? Sub is below, so that's going to be below the arachnoid. And that's where you find your cerebrospinal fluid circulating within the meninges. So you want to be able to go superficial to deep or deep to superficial. So recognize epi is above or upon, epidural, dural, arachnoid, subarachnoid, and then pia would be superficial to deep. So on the surface of the brain, you have sulci and gyri. Sulci or sulcus, those are the grooves. So I can see these indentations. And then the bumps on the outside are called the gyri or the gyrus, individual or singular. So the purpose of any folding of any tissue is to increase surface area. Surface area is where chemical reactions occur. And so we want that surface area in our brain. We want as much action as possible, right? So we're going to fold it up so we can fit more brain in our skulls. Cerebrospinal fluid, we talked about it circulating on the exterior and then within the ventricles, but where is it produced? It's produced right here in the choroid plexus. So this red is recognizing capillaries. So there's a bunch of capillaries in the choroid plexus, and that's where we produce cerebrospinal fluid. Then it floats around in the subarachnoid space and in the ventricles. And what's it going to do? It provides cushion. So like if I bump my head, rather than my head hitting my skull or my brain hitting my skull, my brain's going to like, it's going to bounce off of the fluid. So it's a shock absorber. It also has nutrients. It removes waste and antibodies. Antibodies help keep us healthy. So I want a healthy brain. So questions like this, I feel you can answer if you know the brains, like the anatomy. So if you can label a diagram of the brain, you should be able to answer. What are the 3 parts of the diencephalon? What are the 3 parts of the brainstem, right? So let's go inside the inner brain making up the diencephalon. You have the corpus callosum, but what I'm looking at, the 3 parts, is the epithalamus above the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. And then the 3 parts of the brainstem, this looks kind of funny pulling the brainstem out. So it's this piece here enlarged. So underneath the thalamus, so go below that, you have the midbrain, not much there. And then the first bump on the brain is on the brainstem is the pons. Remember that's related to pathways of breathing. And then the medulla are vital signs. That was the bottom bump on the brainstem. So when we did our dissection, we looked for the 4th ventricle in the cerebellum, and then we went straight over and found the medulla pretty easily. 4 major regions of the brain. Again, if you know the anatomy of the brain, you should be able to answer these. So first, this whole big chunk here, 85% of the brain, is the cerebrum. And then the next largest piece, about 10% of the brain, is the cerebellum. And then we also have the diencephalon and the brainstem. So that makes up the 4 parts. And then we already identified 85 and 10 is what the brain breaks down into, the cerebrum and cerebellum. And then that leaves just about 5% to be within this region here. So that pretty well takes you through the whole review sheet. Last night I was looking at this TED Talk, and it was about how do we learn. So if you click on this link, of course, not from the video, but I can put the links below. But also my students have access to the actual PowerPoint. So if you click on that link, you can get the TED Talk. It's pretty cool. A lot of you are interested in how we learn. But right around the 9-minute mark here, she says, nothing is more effective than practice at helping you learn. You have to do the work. So my Google friends who like to just Google answers, that's not going to make connections in your brain, and you're not going to remember it nearly as well. Research has shown that increased difficulty, the increased struggle. So yeah, it was hard to find that answer, but struggling to find it caused dendrites to grow, and they're making connections that are going to find a file folder on your test. Increased struggle, if you will, during practice actually leads to more learning and greater structural change in the brain. So you have to do the work, you have to do the struggle in order to make those connections, in order to physically change your brain. And the physical change in the brain is the actual learning. It's you being able to recall information. And you're not going to get that from Googling answers on your objectives. So around 9 minutes, you can scroll ahead if you want to see what that has to do with. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that is helpful, and I think you should feel prepared for your test. So you'll do great.